Today I'm going to show you a new set of Variable ND filters and how they can help you when you're filming. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Variable NDs, and I usually shoot both stills and film with fixed ND filters. From being able to control the polarization when I want to just having less glass in front of the sensor. If you have the time, fixed NDs are the way to go. However, in a run and gun scenario when you have a very limited amount of time, Variable ND filters are a huge time saver and can be the difference between getting the shot and missing it. The main issue I have with Variable NDs is that some of the companies market them as being a one-stop shop for both stills and video. But in reality, they're best suited for video, and the better companies will tell you this. After my video on the magnetic filter system, which I think is great, Freewell have sent me a set of their Variable NDs, as a lot of you were asking for them. Now, because of the nature of Variable ND filters, they aren't magnetic, but today I'm going to test them out to see how they perform. And for the record, I'm not sponsored by Freewell and have no affiliations to them. I'm just interested in this product, and if it's any good for filming, I'm going to let you know about them. Unfortunately, I don't have the Polar Pro Peter McKinnon filters to test them against, but nevertheless, we'll see how they do against not having any filters at all and against my Tiffin Variable ND filter. Now, for photography, I'd always recommend fixed ND filters, and I've done a video on why I think this. It's mainly because of that dreaded X pattern. However, these filters don't show that X pattern. They do this by having hard stops in the filter, and you can only rotate them by a certain amount. And this is really great because we don't get that horrible X pattern that I keep going on about. Now, if we take a closer look at these filters, we've got these grooves around the edges, which makes them a lot easier to take on and off. They are screw-on filters, and like I said earlier, they're not magnetic filters. Now, with all Variable ND filters, the front element is bigger than the actual thread size, so you can't use your existing lens caps. They get around this by providing you with a magnetic lens cap, so you can always protect that front element when your camera is in the bag. They come in a set of 2 filters, although you can buy them separately. The standard day is a 2 to 5 stop filter, and the bright day is a 6 to 9 stop filter. So on a cloudy day, you'd use the 2 to 5 stop filter, and the 6 to 9 stop filter would be better for bright sunny days. Due to the physics of these filters, you will get the polarization effect, as they are 2 bits of polarized glass that let more or less light in when you rotate them. So here are some examples of how much of this effect you can see. So first of all, I have the 6 to 9 stop filter starting at 9 stops. I set movie mode to aperture priority to keep an even exposure. As I rotate to 6 stops, there is less of a polarization effect in the image. Looking at the screen grabs side by side, it actually copes really well. And this is at 17mm, so a super wide angle. Next, this is the 2 to 5 stop filter. I started at 2 stops and rotated it to 5 stops. Again in aperture priority to keep a constant exposure. Looking at the screen grabs side by side, this one does a really good job at controlling that polarization. Now, even though all Variable ND filters have this polarization to a certain extent, if you do know about it, even when you're on a run and gun shoot or you're filming a fast-paced event or subject, they can really help you get good exposure, and you can kind of compensate for this polarization effect. Now, Variable ND filters help in 2 ways. When filming, you should always try and follow the 180-degree shutter rule. If you don't know what this is, click on the eye in the corner or the link in the description. This is where your shutter speed should be half the frame rate. I normally shoot at 25 frames a second, so my shutter speed should always be 1/50th of a second. This is an example of a shot without the filter on, where I'm trying to get a shallow depth of focus on a sunny day. My shutter is up to around 1/4000th of a second, and it really does have that jittery staccato look. Now, if you're Jason Bourne in a fight scene, this is fine, but for everyday filming, this doesn't look great. This second example is where I'm trying to get the shutter speed down to 1/50th of a second, and I want to follow that rule. But with my aperture up to f22, which isn't great, it's still overexposing the shot. So on this third shot, I have the variable ND filter fitted. I can choose my shutter speed and aperture and keep them static. Then I just dial in the exposure with the variable ND so I don't see those zebras and I know I have a good exposure. Well, that's how I do it anyway. Another good thing with variable NDs is if the exposure changes, say if you're at a location where the sun is periodically going behind the clouds, you can quickly adjust the variable ND to suit the changing exposure. With my Tiffin ND filter, which is a little bit cheaper, I can do a similar thing, but there are no hard stops. And if it gets too bright, where I need more than 5 to 6 stops of reduction in light, this is when I start to see that X pattern. This tends to make the footage unusable. With the Freewell filters, as they do have the hard stops built in, I don't have to worry about this at all. If it gets too bright for the 2 to 5 stop filter, I just swap them out. Now the 6 to 9 stop filter is really good if you're using, say, a fast prime lens. They'll still give you the opportunity to use those really wide apertures while still following the 180-degree shutter rule. As for any color shift in the image, due to the polarization, you will get some color movement in them. But Freewell have done a pretty good job of controlling this. Mine gave a slightly warmer image, but when I alter the white balance to compensate, I can get rid of this. As for the sharpness, this is with the 2 to 5 stop filter, and this is with the 6 to 9 stop filter. And then this is without any filter at all. The YouTube compression might have hidden this a little bit on your monitor, but there isn't much of a difference in the sharpness. They all do a really good job. As for vignetting, they seem to control this very well. I got the 67mm set, and I have it on the Tamron 17 to 28mm, which has a 67mm thread. At 17mm, as you can see, there isn't a visible vignette. Normally I would get a bigger set of filters, but I was pleasantly surprised by this. One thing that still annoys me about these filters is that you have 2 of them. The whole idea of a variable ND is that you have one filter that covers all conditions, but you still have to change these when it gets too bright or when it gets too dark. Now this is me being just a little bit picky, and it's a much better option than having a whole set of fixed NDs where you might have to keep changing them out, or you might have to keep changing your settings to suit the changing exposures. Now they are ideal for run and gun shooters, and because of those hard stops, you don't have to worry at all about that X pattern. As for having 2 filters, due to the physics of how these work, there is no getting around this. So you either have one filter that covers everything but then goes into that horrible X pattern, or you have 2 filters that break it up. And I'd much prefer to avoid the X pattern and have 2 filters. After using these for a couple of weeks, I actually quite like them. I don't have to worry about that X pattern I keep going on about, and because of the variable nature of them, I can quickly change the exposure without having to change any of my primary settings. If you are switching between them and taking them off and shooting without the filters, it would be worth setting a custom white balance profile on the day. And to be honest, if you're doing lots of filming, you should be doing this for every different lighting environment anyway. And what this means is that your footage will look a lot more consistent. You won't get that staccato look when it gets really bright, and you'll just be able to control the exposure a lot better. So if you are interested in these, check out the link in the description below. They have just been released, and I think they've got them on a special price, saving a little bit of money. So go and check out that link. I think they're fantastic for run and gun shooters, where you have very little time to change setups. But when I have time, I do prefer my fixed ND filters. I suppose it's a bit like the zoom versus prime lens debate in the filter world. They both do different things well, and whilst one tool might be better for a certain scenario, the other one will be better for other situations. Now, what are your thoughts on variable ND filters? Do you love them or do you hate them? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.